years I was on campus, from 2013 to 2017, I feel like that kind of overlapped actually pretty nicely with what I'll kind of call like America's Great Racial Meltdown. When I came to campus, we were still kind of in like the post-racial, colorblind vibe. I feel like those 4 years, like that kind of whole mentality really collapsed.
A new wave of social and political engagement on college campuses began with the formation of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013. The movement was a response to the acquittals of white police officers for charges in the deaths of black victims such as Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and Eric Garner. Minority students at LMU began to rally in support of the movement, sometimes holding their own BLM-style protests.
The same way that the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement provided almost a path or a guide for students in the 1960s, what grew up alongside this push on college campuses these days is, of course, the movement for Black Lives.
My sophomore year was very, very much taken up by Black Lives Matter and Ferguson and the fallout of that. Ferguson, I think, was the big turning point. The first time that Americans turned on their TVs and saw one of their cities on fire because of race.
In this moment, students are seeing what's happening with African Americans off campus concerning the interactions between black people and law enforcement and that sort of thing. And it's frightening to students who are 18 years old. They fear they could turn out to be like a Mike Brown or a Trayvon Martin.
We did a die-in at the Christmas tree lighting, Christmas 2014, like right at the height of the Ferguson thing. That was not a very popular move on campus. All of a sudden, oh, you're those kids who hate Christmas.
Activism nationwide also received a boost with the rise of Donald Trump, whose rhetoric and later actions as president inflamed passions across the country. In the weeks following the 2016 election, students held a sit-in outside President Timothy Law Snyder's office to protest his silence on the issue of undocumented students. Following a lengthy dialogue with the protesters, Snyder eventually declared his support for undocumented students and pledged to do what he could to protect them. Even before Trump's election, LMU's population of Dreamers, children of undocumented immigrants, had begun to raise awareness of immigration issues on campus.
When I was a student, I believe it was my junior year, we hosted the first Immigration Awareness Week, is what we called it, and we wanted to make sure to target students that normally, not the ones that are already in the know of what the issues were at the time. How do we target students that normally wouldn't come to our events, that normally wouldn't participate in these dialogues?
At the start, being an activist was not a popular thing to do. You could expect eye rolls even in class.
During what was called Convo Hour, so before on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 1:30 there were no classes, which was also a prime lunchtime for a lot of people. So what we did is we blocked all the entrances to the Malone building. We held up signs that kind of had different facts about just what the conditions were at the border at the time. It got a lot of attention because people couldn't not see us, people couldn't avoid us. A lot of people were very frustrated, were very upset. I remember a lot of folks that worked in student affairs came out and they were holding copies of the community standards and they were kind of trying to find what they could get us on. We realized that maybe blocking the entrances of an eatery weren't the best thing. Maybe just standing 2 feet, 3 feet right in front of it would have been better, because that way people don't they can't avoid us, but they can still kind of go about their day, so still giving them something to think about. In retrospect, the reasons why we couldn't think of these things ahead of time is because we didn't really have anything to go off of. There were no things like demonstrations or walkouts or sit-ins that happened at LMU before, or at least not in our time for us to remember.
In sharp contrast, by the end of my LMU experience, it was cool to be an activist. All of a sudden everyone wanted to be an activist. The night after the election, we had 200 people show up to a meeting.
Now activism is more accepted or embraced or expected.
Once Donald Trump was elected president, the BSU did march across campus, and I think that was kind of my turning point to be involved in activism on LMU's campus. In high school, I was kind of active in kind of the social justice scene, but I wasn't really as expressive with it as I am in college. And I definitely think that that kind of camaraderie, that kind of feeling that we all got when we marched together across campus was really kind of like the turning point for me to actually be like, wow, activism at LMU is something that's both needed and wanted.
My take was that this is going to die down. We're not going to keep getting 200 people at these meetings, and that was true. But the wave crested and then fell, but the water level is still higher now than it was before the wave, if that makes sense, right? Like, for better or for worse, I think the Trump era has awakened lots of people to the stakes of government and the stakes of our politics, and I think that's the silver lining. It's the only silver lining, but it is, I think, a pretty significant one.
You know, as an historian, there's always a quick desire to want to compare the generations and that sort of thing, and that's not always fair. There were different circumstances going on. As I mentioned before, there was a draft happening, there was a war going on that affected everyone.
I feel that activism now has just been a little less radicalized because we have so many other outlets to be active. What people think of activism, they think of the marches, they think of the demonstration, but activism right now is me being in college. Activism right now is us coming together at a predominant institution and still being able to succeed in an institution and a system that is not made for Black bodies. Like, us coming to LMU is activism in itself, and I feel like a lot of people don't understand that.
You know, LMU, in my view, is still not terribly an activist school. One of the things I've said to ASLMU presidents, though, over the last few years is quit talking about it and do something. Choose an issue and go after it. And I think a real difference could be made.
This may get me in trouble. For students to get that spirit back is to have the ability to say no, to say boo when they see something wrong, and that's difficult, and it goes against some of our natural inclinations of civilization. But that's what it takes to move things along. See, the idea is this: institutions don't progress by themselves. They're not designed to progress with regard to culture, social justice, and things like that. It takes young people nudging and pushing and sometimes cajoling these institutions to be better.
Our administration just needs a lot of pushing. Our administration needs to be challenged at every corner, questioned for everything they do, because that's how we get answers, unfortunately. They aren't just as transparent as they think they are, and we as students need to push them to do better, push them to question why did they do this, push them to incorporate these Jesuit and Ignatian values that they say that our school are built on.
There's no doubt that student activism will continue. It ebbs and flows throughout history, but always resurges when students see injustice to be fought in society. One can only wonder what challenges await as a new generation, the so-called Generation Z, approaches college age. Whatever awaits, students at LMU will face it along with the rest of the nation. And with the university's history in mind, there's little reason to doubt many of them will take action.